Level your Chevy Silverado or GMC Sierra 1500 from front to rear while giving your truck a more aggressive look with Rough Country's 2-inch leveling kit. Before you begin installation, review the included instructions and verify that you have all the required parts and hardware before proceeding. You'll also want to verify that you have all the proper tools before disassembling your vehicle. To begin installation, raise the vehicle off the ground to prepare for installation of the 2-inch leveling kit. Remove the tires and wheels from the vehicle. Remove the 4 bolts and remove the skid plate set aside and retain hardware for later use. Disconnect the 3 plugs at the power steering rack. Loosen the tie rod end nut and use a hammer to unseat the taper by striking only the front of the knuckle. Remove the nut and the tie rod end from the knuckle. Disconnect the ABS line from the mount on the arm. Then remove the ABS line from the knuckle using a wrench. Retain hardware for later use. Now remove the ABS sensor from the knuckle. Retain hardware for reuse. Remove the brake line from the knuckle using a socket wrench. Remove the brake caliper using a socket, then hang it out of harm's way. Do not hang it by the brake line. Now unscrew the axle nut and retain for reuse. Loosen the upper ball joint, then support the lower control arm and remove the nut. Now remove the upper ball joint from the knuckle. Unseat the axle from the hub when leaning the knuckle back. Take care not to overextend or damage the axle or the axle boot. Using a socket, remove the nut from the lower sway bar link nut. Remove the 2 lower strut bolts using a socket wrench. Using a small pry bar, remove the axle side clip from the lower strut. Using a socket, remove the bolt securing the wire harness to the frame. Remove the 3 nuts from the top of the strut using an 18mm wrench, then remove the strut. Mark the strut at the coil and the coil spring seat. Place the strut in a spring compressor to rotate the strut 180 degrees to retain the OE bar pin angle. Mark the 3 studs on top of the strut to 1 1/4 inch. Use a cutoff wheel to cut the top of the 3 studs off. Install the cover plate on top of the strut. Install 3 of the supplied hex head bolts into the bottom of the strut spacer. Seat the bolt head into the hex of the spacer and confirm that the studs are flush just below the top of the spacer installed onto the strut. Secure the strut spacer using 3 of the supplied nuts. Tighten the upper strut nuts using a socket. Install the strut into the upper mount of the vehicle and secure using 3 of the supplied nylock nuts. Secure the lower strut using the OE bolt in the front side using the clip on the strut. Under the axle, install the supplied bolts, flat washers, and nuts. Tighten the OE bolt, then tighten the hardware using a wrench and socket. Tighten the upper strut mount using a 17mm wrench. Do not exceed 30 foot-pounds of torque when tightening. Secure the wiring harness to the frame using the retained bolt, then tighten using a socket wrench. Seat the axle in the hub, then connect the upper ball joint to the knuckle. Tighten using a socket. Install the ABS sensor into the knuckle and on top of the upper control arm. If removed, install the ABS line onto the bracket. Turn the bracket flush with the knuckle away from the coil spring when turned full lock. Install the brake rotor and caliper using the retained hardware. Install the axle nut using the retained hardware. Connect the tie rod end to the knuckle and tighten using a socket wrench. Then connect the 3 plugs at the power steering rack. Reinstall the 4 bolts into the skid plate and tighten. Now reinstall the tires and wheels and lower to the ground. As you can see, this simple solution raises the front end to match the height of the rear, providing a more aggressive appearance and enough increased ride height to run larger tires and wheels.